into the air. The trundle bed that I was sleeping on acted like a spring and flung me upwards. I smacked against the bookcase and the makeshift 8-crate entertainment center with a TV and a VCR on it. It sounds kind of comical when you know that I'm okay, but it really wasn't. It was January 17th, 1994, 4:31 a.m. This was one of the most devastating earthquakes in California's recent history. I was 6 miles, as the crow flies, from the epicenter of the earthquake. It's what earthquake aficionados, otherwise known as seismologists, call a blind thrust. It was a violent upward thrust followed by 22 shakings of violent back and forth. While officially it was only 6.7 magnitude on the scale, it was a shallow earthquake, only about 11 miles beneath the surface. And that blind thrust action made the devastation closer to a 7.6 earthquake. 57 people died as a direct result of that earthquake. 8,700 people were injured. Hundreds more died in the following weeks as a result of diminished emergency services and a collapsed infrastructure. It was a weird night before the earthquake. I couldn't sleep. The dogs in the neighborhood were barking all night long. It was oddly warm for January, even in California. My brother couldn't sleep either, and he had gotten up, gone to the kitchen to get some water when the earthquake struck. He was pummeled by stone mugs, and he had to lift himself up on the counter and crawl under the cabinets to protect himself from the dishes falling out of the kitchen cabinets. For me, I was in a bedroom and the bookshelf and all its contents had fallen on top of me along with an old TV. You know, the glass tube TVs had fallen on top of me. By the time the shaking had stopped, my brother and my parents were pounding on the door trying to get through, but the bookcase had fallen against the door, preventing the door from being open. It took me a while to dig myself out of this mess and finally get the door open and go into the house and see a disaster area. Bookshelves and all their contents had fallen over. Dishes had flown across the room. The chimney and the fireplace had collapsed. The water heater had fallen over. In our yard, in California they have brick privacy fences. Those had all collapsed. We ran out into the neighborhood to check on everyone in the neighborhood to make sure everyone was okay. Fortunately, everyone in our cul-de-sac was fine, and we banded together and we started pitching tents in the front yards because when you looked at the houses, you could tell they were no longer safe. The tents in the front yards would be our homes until inspectors could come and see that our homes were safe to live in again because they were preliminarily declared condemned by FEMA. It would be 3 weeks before the power was back on, gas was on, water was flowing, and inspectors could come and make sure that our house was safe to live in again. I survived that earthquake, but I'm forever changed. While that earthquake only lasted 22 seconds, there were 1,140 aftershocks in the following 10 months after that earthquake. Some of those aftershocks were as big as 6.0, which is a devastating earthquake in its own right. We lived our lives watching everywhere. Everywhere we went, we had to look for safe places to go if another aftershock struck. Every moment of our lives, we lived wondering if we were going to be safe. I got a job at a grocery store right after the earthquake to help clean up the grocery store. The power was out, so the ice cream had melted inside of the coolers. Meats and berries and produce had spoiled. It was a mess inside of that grocery store. There was one time after everything was cleaned up, an aftershock struck, and the 25-foot glass in front of the grocery store collapsed, and the wine and all the food was thrown off of the shelves. Freeways were closed, and everywhere we went, we were constantly living under the fear of what was going to happen next. Will we die in the next aftershock? And it turns out that if the earthquake doesn't kill you, surviving it might. A few weeks ago, my family rented the movie San Andreas. And while we watched this movie, I sat there restless, agitated, uncomfortable, and stressed out. And while my wife and kids found the movie to be a thriller, I found it to be a horror film. Because 22 years later, those 22 seconds still affect me.